Everyone, welcome to our weekly lecture series. This is great openings of the past. Yeah, that's what it is. No, this lecture is sponsored by Anonymous, who sponsors a lot of our lectures, and it's on the Stonewall attack. I had to clarify which side was playing the Stonewall, but it was white. If black plays the Stonewall, that's called the Stonewall Dutch. And since I live in suburban Atlanta, we mainly talk about Stonewall Jackson more than anything else. The Stonewall attack can be many things. Typical position is here on your screen on the Wikipedia article on the Stonewall attack. Stonewall attack Wikipedia article had much more information than I was expecting. So whoever wrote the article did a good job. Basically, white's putting their pawns on dark squares, which makes their dark square bishop not the best, but these things happen. And as a consequence, white gets a stone wall of pawns in the center, makes it difficult for black to achieve anything in the center. Stonewall attack, it says, was the first recorded game was in 1842 with Howard Staunton being white. Then I have a game by the Boston master Preston Ware, who played it in the 1870s and 80s. Played a slightly different move order than what was given, and ended up beating world champion Wilhelm Steinitz in the event. And Pillsbury played it a few times, fine American player. They have a list of players who would play it occasionally: Lasker, Capablanca, Alekhine, Gagarin, Rubinstein, Tarash, Rady, Tower, Kauer, Morazzi, Breyer. And then many strong players have played the Stonewall as black in the Dutch, including Carlsen, who beat Anand and Caruana by playing it, I assume, in Blitz or Rapid, be my assumption. And they give some sample games here. I decided not to choose any of these games since you can see them here on Wikipedia. There's a couple Pillsbury games, then a game that Schiffers lost. I've heard of Schiffers, but I never heard of his opponent, Paul Lipke. And a game Mackenzie lost. Again, I've heard of Mackenzie, but I never heard of F.J. Lee. But people I haven't heard of can beat people I have heard of. These games are typically from the late 1890s and early 1900s. The opening isn't super popular now, especially at the top level. But at the club level, I think a lot of people are playing Stonewall with white and black. With one side or the other, sometimes with both. So pretty nice Wikipedia article giving you sort of an idea of what it is. And I'm going to talk more about it when we look at the games in the game section, which we're going to do now. Okay, so this game is from 1882, where Preston Ware was playing in the Vienna International and played this opening several times. And he's playing Miksa Weiss. And again, this game is from a long time ago. Playing the Stonewall attack for white at the top level was more popular 100, 150 years ago than it is now. Now it's more popular with club players. Because typically, top level players aren't going to punish their bishop so early in the game by putting everything in front of it. So d4, d5, and then f4. And this was a move order that Preston Ware used when he played the Stonewall. And you can use any move order. A more common move order is to play e3, bishop d3, and then play f4. But, I mean, you could play f4 right away. It's not a big difference. Usually it transposes. Okay, Weiss played e6, which blocks in this bishop, which white already did. So that's could be that black is going to play his own Stonewall and try to get a position like that. Knight f3, knight f6. He decides not to do that. e3, bishop d3. And irrespective of the move order in the Stonewall, where these 5 pieces and pawns are, that's where they're going to be. And whether white plays c4 or c3 or b3 and bishop b2 or bishop d2 to e1 to h4 or knight bd2, that's yet to be determined. But 99% of the time in the Stonewall, that's the Stonewall. And the purpose of the Stonewall for the white player, I would say there's 2 purposes. The chess purpose is to get an attack on the king side because we're pushing our f-pawn pretty early and we're giving ourselves outpost squares for our knight, either on e5, which is most likely, or occasionally g5. And sometimes this knight comes into it and we can play both. But that's the idea of the Stonewall. The other idea is, if you play these queen pawn openings like Queen's Gambits and Slavs and semi-Slavs and Nimzo Indians and King's Indians and Grunfelds, there's a lot of theory and there's a lot of study that your opponents have put into it. But if you play something a little bit unusual like the Stonewall, I mean, a lot of players with black are just on their own and they're just like, okay, I'll just play natural chess. And sometimes they get checkmated quickly because they're not good at defending their king from white's onslaught. Okay, but I chose some good games for this lecture so you could see some interesting positions. Okay, black plays c5, white plays c3. Some people, I'm not one of those people, some people say it's not a Stonewall unless white plays c3 and that white should make these 6 moves no matter what black does. Okay, I mean, that's up to you. If you're playing the Stonewall with white, then, you could decide what you think the Stonewall is. But, I mean, pawns are on d4 and f4. That's sort of the main idea. Okay, so knight c6, castles, a6. I guess black wants to play b5. a6 is pretty unusual. Bishop d2. Okay, so Preston Ware has decided he wants to play bishop e1 and get his bishop to h4 if possible, and then his knight can go to d2 and complete development. And then if the white bishop is on this diagonal, then it's not, completely blocked by this pawn chain. So that's one idea. Another idea, sometimes white plays b3, bishop b2, or occasionally b3, bishop a3, and the knight still goes to d2 when white plays c3. Okay, bishop d2, castles. White played a3. Not 100% necessary, but here's what white's thinking. White's thinking, if I play bishop e1, which he didn't do, and black takes, I can't take with the e pawn, which I'd like to do because the f pawn is hanging. And if I take with the c pawn, maybe knight b4 is annoying, and I have to move my bishop back to e2. So maybe that's what white was thinking when he played a3, was he's going to make sure that there's no universe where black plays knight b4 and attacks the bishop on d3. Okay, b6 instead of b5. h3, stopping knight g4, and he's preparing to play g4 himself. h3 is not a move that I would make, but I wasn't alive in 1892 or 1882, I should say. So what do I know? Bishop b7. This seems perfectly fine for black. Bishop e1, the point of bishop d2. Knight e4, that seems like a good move. Knight bd2. This is your typical kind of Stonewall. Again, if black takes on d4 and white takes with the e pawn, the f pawn is hanging. So white's going to take with the c pawn probably. And then I sort of like the move a3. I like that black's pieces don't have access to the b4 square. Knight takes d2. That move I don't like. If I was black, I would defend my knight by either playing f5 or knight e7, so my bishop is defending. I don't like just trading off my active knight for white's passive knight. Queen takes. The bishop still wants to go to h4, so we'll take with the queen. Knight a5. Black has a cheapo threat. Knight b3. The dogs see it. Rook d1, stopping the fork. Knight c4, attacking the queen. White really doesn't want to give up their white squared bishop. This is your good bishop. You have all of your pawns on dark squares, so you need your white squared bishop to be active. So queen e2. The knight went back to a5. I guess black was afraid of losing a pawn. Could have played b5 if he was really afraid, but okay, knight a5. Bishop h4. Finally, the bishop gets out. Queen c7. And knight to g5. Here comes the Shaq attack. And it was 100 years before Shaq was born. Okay, well, not 100, maybe 90. Okay, so white's obviously attacking the h7 pawn. And as you can see, black's pieces are on the queen side for the most part. And there's nothing defending the king side here. So white's going to get as many pieces as possible, even the rook over here to attack the black king. So h6 seems sort of obvious. Queen h5. Now, if you take the knight, queen h7's checkmate. So he didn't do that. Played knight c4, attacking e3 pawn and the b2 pawn. Nice fork. And knight takes e6. White goes for the brilliant attack. Black says, thanks for the knight. Oh, give me the knight. And then queen h7, or queen g6. Okay, now, if it was white's turn to move, which it's not, white would play queen h7 check and bishop g6 mate. And if you don't believe me, let's play knight takes e3, queen g6, queen h7 check, bishop g6 checkmate. Okay, so black is facing checkmate right away after white's piece sacrifice. So black played rook f5, sacrificing the exchange. He's like, okay, you take my rook, I take, and then black has two pieces for a rook, and white's attack, for the most part, it's gone. It's hard for white to keep attacking. Okay, Preston Ware didn't want to do that. He wanted to keep his white squared bishop, so he took this pawn with check. Black played rook f7, stopping the loss of the rook. Queen g6, and now white's threatening queen h7 check, queen h8 checkmate, because the king can't escape. So king f8, king runs away. Queen h7, threatening queen h8 checkmate. King e8, running away. Bishop g6. And white is down a piece but has a big attack. And now the aforementioned knight takes e3 fork would line up the knight and the king on the e file, so white could put one of their rooks on e1. That probably wouldn't work out very well. Also, queen g8 check looks annoying. So bishop f8, always play bishop f8. f5, white wants to play f6 and open up the f file. King d7, that's a move I would never consider because it just gives the rook away on f7. But I guess he was very afraid of f6 and the rook coming in, and this pin looks like a forever pin. So it's not a forever pin because he moved his king out of the pin and ended up losing his rook. Now, black is down material, but black played knight takes e3, getting his material back. Bishop check, king c6, queen g6, and finally he gets his exchange back. This is a funny position because white sacrificed a piece for one pawn, then white won a second pawn, then white won a rook, then black won the exchange in a pawn by taking on e3. And after we add all of that up, which I can't do because it's too hard, white's up a pawn. And actually they have the same pieces. They both have a rook and two bishops and a queen, and it's just 7 pawns to 6. So obviously white's doing well up a pawn, And white is doing more well because black's king is on c6. And this was in 1882, the year of the game. People nowadays are like, hey, I'm a pawn up. I'm going to have good endgame technique, and I'm going to have a passed pawn, and I'm going to weaken my opponent's pawn structure. And this is 1882, so people just played like maniacs. So they didn't care if they were pawn up. They'll sack all their pieces, borrow some pieces for you from the next game, and sack those pieces too. So this game isn't going to be boring just because white's attack has succeeded and white has a pawn extra and the attack. There's going to be more attack. c4, blocking the center. So, white wants to play d takes c, and then the d pawn is attacked by the bishop and attacked by the rook. So c4 blocks that up, or so he thought. Bishop takes d5 check. White's not done sacrificing material. King takes. They're playing king of the hill, then black would win. I don't play king of the hill, so I don't even get my own joke. Queen e6. Black played the engine move 100 years before engines. King c6. The only legal move. Queen c4 check. Black could play bishop c5, which gives his bishop away, but he played king d7, which makes more sense. Queen e6 check. Black only has one legal move. King c6. Now, material is white has 3 extra pawns for the piece that he sacrificed. 7 pawns to 4. And white keeps attacking. And white can attack with the queen on the diagonal and with the bishop on this diagonal. So it's very difficult for black to escape the attack. King b5, queen check. And now black played king a4. If black plays this sort of obvious queen c4, then we have a nice tactic here which wins immediately. We play a4 check. You can't take with the queen because that's illegal. And you can't take with the king because you lose your queen. So I guess the only move is king c5. And now white can win by playing b4 check, and black has to give their queen away, or bishop f2 check, which may even be stronger, and black has to give their queen away. So queen c4 don't work, and king a4 and king a5 are the only other 2 legal moves. So he played king a4, queen c2 check, king b5, a4 check, and this position black resigned. Black has 3 legal moves. King c4 gets mated by this, and king c5 gets mated the other way around, this and rook d4 mate. So the only move that doesn't get mated is king a5. Unfortunately, after b4 check, black not only has to give a bishop away, but black is also losing their queen. Although if I was an engine, which I'm not, I would bet a lot of money there's checkmate, you don't just win the queen. So like after takes, black can resign because of queen takes queen. But probably there's an engine somewhere going, queen takes queen, terrible. You should play rook b1 check, and you should play bishop e1 check, and it's mate in 4 or something, or mate in 3, or whatever. I can't really argue with that. It seems like, without doing any analysis at all, rook b1 check is just mate. Because if you play king a3, this is mate. And if you play king here, then I can play bishop e1 check. And you have to go here, then this is mate. And I'm assuming bishop e1 check is also mate. Because I don't see a good move for black. King a3, this is mate. So the best move is queen c3. Man, the truth hurts. Okay, so after a4 check, black resigned because black's going to get mated and or lose his queen or both. So probably both. So white started attacking on the king side, forcing the black king to evacuate. And then it turned out black's king wasn't safe on the queen side either. And white never stopped sacrificing material. So Preston Ware had a lot of interesting Stonewall attack games in the 1870s and 80s if you're interested in trying to find a player who played the Stonewall a lot and had good success. I mean, he beat Steinitz, so that's pretty good success. Best player you could beat then. Okay, next game. Okay, next game I chose because black was a much higher rated player than white. And typically, when we see an unusual opening, the lower rated player is not doing very well, except this game. So white is 350 points lower rated than their opponent. Their opponent's Alexander Onischuk, famous American grandmaster. And white's name, I've never heard of him, Ritvars Reimanis. And when I was preparing for the lecture, I saw a lot of his games with white. And I was like, oh, he beat Onischuk. That's pretty good. Because usually 23-30s don't beat 26-80s. So if you can play an opening that I'm lecturing on and beat a strong grandmaster, then maybe I'll look at your game. This was played in the Pro Chess League in 2018. This was a rapid game. Okay, so this is the more normal Stonewall move order. White's playing e3 on move 2. Then f4, c3, there's the Stonewall. And white did something unusual. Instead of playing, knight f3 and bishop d3, white played bishop e2 and bishop f3, offering a trade of the white squared bishops, which is very unusual. And black declined and said, your bishop on f3 is not very good. And white begged to differ and played knight h3. The knight can go to f2 or g5 later. Now, because the knight's on h3, if black tries to take this, hoping taking this loses the pawn, it doesn't lose the pawn because the knight is defending it. So that's one advantage of playing knight h3. Okay, h6, knight c4. This is the idea behind bishop f3, is we pin the d pawn to the black bishop so we can play tricks like this. Queen e7, and white gets the knight to e5 without having to play knight f3. That's pretty good. Neither knight went to f3, and still white played knight e5. So very Stonewall kind of position, different kind of move order. a6, a4, and g5. So black's not really sacrificing a pawn because this knight is defended twice and it's attacked twice, and we're attacking the pawn that's defending it. And also, if we trade here, we're opening up the h file for the black rook, and black could castle queenside and start attacking on the h and g files. So g5 is a typical kind of move against the Stonewall to try to break it up. Knight f2, the knight wants to go to d3 or g4, defend the other knight. Rook g8, g3, solid. Knight e4. Finally, the first trade takes place. And white has a big attack on the f7 pawn. So black gets rid of the bishop, gets rid of the knight, I should say. If you take with the knight and I take, now I'm threatening the bishop and I'm threatening the f7 pawn. So that's black can't do that. So he has to take with the bishop if he's going to take. Now he has to defend his f pawn, and white has the two bishops. b3, white wants to play bishop a3, activate their bishop. Castles, only way to castle, bishop a3. And then black takes a pawn. It's a doubled pawn, so white didn't care that much. b4, white plays for the initiative on the queen side. Takes. b5, which is a fork. Or that's not a fork, that's a skewer. I was close. Queen c7. So we have this very complicated, weird position. And I think if you play white in a Stonewall, you're looking for complicated, weird positions. And you're going to get them. Bishop f8, always play bishop f8. D takes e3, threatening the queen by discovery. Takes. And white's up in exchange for one pawn. Black is threatening bishop c4. White's threatening the e3 pawn. Both kings are moderately exposed. Queen e3. And black goes for the ending. Black thinks his king is more exposed than white's. And white has an extra exchange, but white's pawn structure is a bit ratty. And black has a nice pawn structure on the king side. Can play f5 and have all those nice pawns. So rook f6, preventing f5. Takes the h pawn. White's up an exchange and a pawn. Or no, just an exchange. I'm sorry. I can't count the pawns very well. Black tries to win the a6 pawn. And he does. Now it's an exchange for a pawn. Looks like it's getting closer to a draw. Bishop d1, defending the a pawn. And white just moves his king up the board. Very interesting that black allowed white to move the king up and take everything, because it looks like it's very dangerous for white to do so, to move the king up into black's pieces. And probably that's what black thought. But white said, no, I can do it. I can come up here and you can't mate me. You can't do nothing. Bishop d5 check, king b5. So white really activated his king in the endgame. Probably black thought they had good chances to attack the white king here. But rook check. Bishop b3 because the bishop's pinned. And bishop on e6 is pinned to the king. Knight c5. And if you play rook takes rook, white has the sneaky bishop a2 check, attacking the rook and winning the rook and winning the game. So black played rook check, knight takes. Now white's up the exchange for no pawns. White has two passed pawns on the queen side, so good winning chances for white. Black tries to push their pawns, but to no avail. Instead, he just loses all of them. And all the pawns go away. Black can resign, but he plays on a little while. And here he resigned because white's threatening rook check, then rook h7 or rook c6. And moving the knight just gets mated. So, and we're up in exchange and a pawn. So a really interesting game that white won against a much higher rated player in a team event. This is the Pro Chess League is a team event. Typically, higher rated players don't like losing in team events because their team doesn't like that. You're playing for your team and you feel like you're playing for more than just yourself. So I always felt more pressure when I played in team events. I didn't want to let my team down. I'm not saying I didn't let my team down, but I didn't want to. So that's good, right? Okay, so great win from a lower rated player against super strong GM. And this was played 6 years ago. Okay, now next game was played in 2008 between Evgeny Gleizerov, grandmaster I've heard of, and Vasilij Gagarin, who's 2390 FIDE, but I have a feeling I've heard of them also, so maybe the rating got higher. It's played at the Rilton Cup. White is a higher rated player. Plays f4 on move 1. And we transpose into the Stonewall. You can see white's Stonewall. White gets the usual 5 moves that I think make the Stonewall, although it didn't happen the last game. And white played bishop c2, which is an unusual move. And reason white played bishop c2 is black didn't play d5. So white wants to play d5, but white needs to protect the pawn. And if black plays d5 now, that means black played d6, then d5, losing a tempo. So then white's tempo loss looks fine. So Black played b6, and white did play d5 and e4. So now if you just showed up to the lecture and you're like, okay, let's see that Stonewall lecture, and this is the first position you see, you might say, wait a minute, this isn't a Stonewall. This looks like some kind of Sicilian, Pierce. What's this all about? That's because white eventually and very early played d5 and e4. So it was a Stonewall formation, but as happens in chess, we move our pieces and the formations change. Now it looks more like some kind of Benoni. And the game got super complicated, which is what white wants in a Stonewall. No theory, super complicated. Plays e5, breaking through in the center. Then plays very interesting line here. Takes the knight and plays knight g4. So we're threatening knight takes f6 check. Black plays bishop h4, attacking the rook, probably thinking white would trade or play rook f1, but white played g3. And at first glance, I was interested in this sacrifice, bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes. That looked pretty interesting. But then I realized after bishop takes, we don't take back. Then we play knight f6 check. And then I was less interested because the rook is hanging and we're in check and so forth. So then I was like, oh, okay, so black played rook e d8, sacrificing a bishop. And the problem is, if I play a normal move like bishop g5, then there's knight e4. And we're threatening the bishop, and we're threatening either knight to f6 check, forking. Got our rook here too. Man, truth hurts. So, sacrificed a piece. He took the bishop on h4. Knight c4, the knight on d2 is pinned. Rook e2, defending the knight. Knight takes b2, attacking the queen and the rook. Takes the rook. And white has two pieces for a rook, and white's pawn structure is obviously terrible. So some compensation. Queen f4, knight e4. White's pieces are really well coordinated, and maybe white can get an attack soon against the black king. Knight check. And rook f1. Black's king is getting a little exposed here. This looks more like a Stonewall now, this position, because the king side blew up, all the pawns were traded, the quality is confusing. Then queen h5, pinning the pawn. You can't take this because your queen's hanging. You can't take with the queen because the knight is defending and the bishop. And you can't take the knight because it's defended. So black can't take anything, but white wants to play queen h6 check and knight h7 check and queen h7. So black's got to do something. Black played knight c4, getting the knight back into the game. Maybe black will play knight e3 soon. Rook takes f5. Queen retreats. Knight h7 check. Now we have two pieces for a rook and there's no pawns for black, and white's obviously crashing through on the king side. Bishop a4 check. Usually you're looking over at the king side and you're like knight f6 check and queen h8 and rook f7 and knight d6 and knight g5. Then the guy plays bishop a4 check and you're like, oh yeah, there's another side of the board. And now black resigned because, man, black has to resign. If you play king here, the truth hurts. Okay, recommended by Lizzo. And then if king here, then mate. And I said if king there, that's the only legal move. So, and then if you play king e7, this is also checkmate. And if you play queen d7, you don't take the queen, you play queen f7 checkmate. So the truth really hurts here. After bishop a4 check, black is incredibly lost. And so that happens sort of all of a sudden. It was a very sharp, complicated position. Then 5 moves later, black has no pieces left and getting mated. And that happens a lot in the Stonewall, is your king safety gets eradicated. And as you saw in the first game and in this game, the black king castled and then ran over to the king side, the queen side, I should say. And here, black didn't make it to the queen side. He tried, but white had pieces all over the board attacking him. Okay, and last but not least, this game was played recently in the U.S. Collegiate Rapid in 2020 between Grigoriy Oparin, who just recently played in the U.S. Championship, and he's currently working with Fabiano Caruana as one of his coaches. And he's playing Emily Nguyen. I think Emily Nguyen plays in the U.S. Junior Girls and U.S. Women's Championship occasionally. Her rating's 2280. She's a much lower rated player than Oparin, who's 2650 FIDE. And probably Emily is very well prepared, like most kids are these days. And Oparin said, let's play something that was popular 150 years ago. Emily won't know that. So he played f4, and they transpose into the Stonewall. And I thought Emily played very well and had a very nice position. He played b3. That's the kind of move that I would play, b3, bishop, b2. Because it seems like the bishop's not good on c1. Seems better on Finegold. So this seems relatively equal, this position. Both sides got their pieces out. You see in the Stonewall very often, not just in the games I'm showing, nobody trades anything for a long time. We're on move 10, 15, and a lot of times all the pieces are still on the board. People are busy developing their pieces, not trading. Okay, now it looks like some trades are going to happen. But no. So here we're on move like, 13, 14, and it's already no pieces traded. C4. And our sponsor, who's anonymous, he said when he plays the Stonewall with white, which is why he sponsored the lecture, he likes to play C4. He said usually around move 11. And so I think this is move 13, 14, but, I'm close. Still no trades. And finally, we have a trade. White plays for kingside attack, which is common in the Stonewall. Black attacks the e5 pawn. Then we have this crazy complications happening. Black's a pawn up, taking the h5 pawn. Finally, we see a lot of trades. Black wins the pawn on e5, although black's pawn structure on the king side isn't something to write home about. And white plays rook h3, threatening the pawn. Bishop on c4 is well placed. Black's up 2 pawns for the moment, but not for long. Rook f5, defending, takes. Rook h6, attacking the e6 pawn. Emily moves her king out of the way from the bishop. Little trading. Now we have equal material, opposite color bishops. Both sides look like they could have an attack on the king. Bishop h3. That's an important move. If we go back here, which looks more active, then black's threatening queen h2 mate. That seems devastating. I mean, if I was walking by this game in a tournament, I would assume black has the better position, but it's very complicated, and white does have a passed e-pawn. So later in the endgame, if they trade some pieces, looks like that pawn could become dangerous. And it's hard for black to get her queen into h2 with the pieces set up like this. So maybe white's okay here. Bishop g3, e4. And now I don't like what Emily did in this position. I think white's king is more dangerously placed than black's king, and she traded queens. And I think that gives all of black's trumps away, and then I'd rather have the white pieces. Takes. Took with the bishop, and the king just goes over to e2. And, I mean, this ending should be a draw, but I think I'd rather have white because I have a passed pawn. Black doesn't have a passed pawn. Okay, and white moves king up. Black moves their king up. Clearly better position for white. Black's king is almost in checkmate now. Rook h1 mate is the threat. So she escapes. Finally, white's up a pawn. Good drawing chances for black with the opposite bishops. Both sides have a passed pawn. They're getting into terrible time trouble now. And unfortunately, in this position, black played rook a2, walking into the skewer. No, that's a fork. Yeah, so white wants to play a7, a8. So black played rook a2, obviously in time trouble, and then bishop e6 check. It may be if black had played king e7 or moved the rook somewhere else to go to a4, for example, or a5. Maybe then black has really good drawing chances here, but just blundered at the end of the game. So we saw a couple of games go into the end game, sort of, and a couple of checkmates where there was big attack. And we saw very complex, complicated, double-edged positions that don't have a lot of theory. And when I'm the higher rated player, when that happens, I'm looking for that. And to be frank, when I'm the lower rated player, I'm looking for that too. I don't want to get into a memorization contest with my opponent in the opening because I'm going to lose that contest. But just positions that are sort of random, both sides have their ideas, both sides' kings are open, you can still get to an end game. That's what I'm looking for when I play chess. Get my opponent out of their preparation, play something interesting, and you can find a lot of nice wins for white in Stonewall attacks. And if you're really interested, you can look at Stonewall Dutches for black, which have the same ideas, except black's playing the Stonewall instead of white. Anyway, I want to thank our sponsor again, who's anonymous. If you'd like to sponsor a lecture, then look on your screen for Karen's email, and that'll explain to you how to sponsor a lecture. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. That really helps out the channel tremendously. And I'll see you guys next time with more weekly lectures. Tonight's lecture, Stonewall Attack. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.